Have you ever felt that overcoming narcissistic abuse was taking an eternity? Have you ever wondered when you were actually going to feel healed and no longer working on your healing journey? Today I want to talk about something that keeps us on that road to recovery unless we face it in all of its layers, and that's C-PTSD. I want to talk about the 5 phases of C-PTSD, and then I want to dissect them and really understand what's needed in order to overcome them. So here are the 5 phases of C-PTSD. Emotional flashbacks, toxic shame, self-abandonment, a vicious inner critic, and social anxiety. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to dissect each one of those in today's video, but I do want to talk about the most noticeable symptom of C-PTSD, and that's emotional flashbacks. Now, the funny thing about emotional flashbacks is that when they're happening, a lot of people don't realize that that's what's happening. And the reason is because emotional flashbacks do not have a visual component. So it's not like something happens and you have this automatic, very clear view of something that happened as a child or something that happened when you were in the relationship with a narcissist, and you understand that you're being reminded of that. No, that's not how it happens. What happens is there's no visual component. There's only this residual emotion, this overwhelming emotion that overcomes you. Something happens that strikes a memory, but again, without that visual component, you're not understanding why you're feeling what you're feeling. So, for example, you just know that you're all of a sudden hyper aroused, your fight or flight system has kicked in, and you're feeling overwhelming and intense emotions that are far deeper and far greater than what the situation at the moment is really warranting. So it's very confusing. It's also important to remember that emotional flashbacks vary in degree of intensity, and they also vary in which emotions they provoke in you. For example, if whatever happened at the moment provokes feelings of fear, all of a sudden you are overwhelmed with anxiety. You may feel panicky, and you may not really understand why whatever's happening at that moment is provoking so much panic. If whatever happened at that moment provokes despair, you might suddenly go into a dissociative state and not understand why. You may feel very numb and detached. If what happens provokes pain, you may react with rage. You may, to protect yourself, you may not understand, why am I so angry? Why is this huge, why am I hitting like a 10 on the intensity scale with something small that just happened? Oftentimes, when you have those overwhelming feelings that don't seem to make sense with what's going on in your current life, it's because you're having an emotional flashback. The interesting thing is, with C-PTSD, it doesn't just go away until you work on it, until you recognize that what's happening in your present is because of unresolved issues of the past. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how that happened with me. I'm also going to explain how you can handle emotional flashbacks, and in the end of the video, I'm going to provide some tools taken from the book PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. I'll also leave the link for that book. I've spoken about it a lot. I had to read it as part of my trauma recovery coaching, and it's a phenomenal book. It's what helped me understand what was going on with my life, that I was having emotional flashbacks, and what to do about it. Okay, so I'm going to leave that for you guys. But I want to give you some examples because nothing hits home like real life examples, right? So I talked about how if you're feeling despair, you'll dissociate and you'll feel numb and you may not understand why. Well, I learned this after I was out of the relationship with a narcissist, after I was in a healthy relationship. Every time I got in the car, I kind of disappeared. Okay, not physically. I was there. I was sitting there. But I would be numb. I couldn't even have a conversation. It was like I wasn't there. And I had to understand what was going on. Nothing in my current situation was causing me to do that. It didn't make sense. It overwhelmed me. I couldn't understand why, and it was very frustrating and frightening. what helped me to get over that was recognizing that I was having an emotional flashback to when I was stuck in a car with a narcissist, having to be yelled at, screamed at, insulted with no place to go. I couldn't get out of the car. I couldn't jump out of a moving car, not that it wasn't a temptation. Obviously, I couldn't do that. So I would go inside of myself and I would dissociate. And that became something that continued even after I was away from the toxicity. My brain didn't just bounce back and say, oh yeah, the car's safe now. No, it continued to do what it had done for me, thinking it was helping me, thinking it was protecting me by helping me to find someplace safe inside of myself. Well, I had to acknowledge that. I also had to acknowledge how hurtful and how painful it was to have to live years, over a decade, of having to be in a car and deal with that situation. You see, that's a lot of the reasons why we get those emotional flashbacks, is because of those unresolved issues that we had. If you're with a narcissist and they abuse you in the car and they treat you horribly, you can't go to them and say, hey, that hurt. Hey, I didn't really like that you did that. They never validate your emotions. So you're carrying all of that pain around, you're stuffing it inside of yourself. So when you're out of the situation with a narcissist, it doesn't just go away. All of those stuffed down emotions are like, hey, now that you're out of that, please acknowledge me. Please heal me so that we can go on and feel healthy and confident inside of ourselves. Everything that comes up when you're having an emotional flashback is because it's an unresolved pain. It's an unresolved circumstance. It's unresolved despair that you felt, unresolved fear. And the best way to overcome that is to take the time to recognize that that's what's going on. So if you were in a relationship with a narcissist, or if you were raised by narcissistic parents, the probabilities are that you're suffering complex PTSD. Like I said, one of the main symptoms of it are emotional flashbacks. Analyze your life. Am I experiencing that? I'm going to give you one more example of one that happened recently, and it really took me by surprise, because the truth is that as you begin to heal your emotional flashbacks, they happen less and less. But every now and then, until you're fully healed, one can catch you by surprise. And this happened with me. I was in a public situation and everyone was no one was doing anything wrong, no one was being unkind, but it was people were very distant with each other, right? There wasn't any feeling of closeness. It was just you were in the room, but there was kind of like an emotional distance. Again, not a big deal. Well, when I got home, I had this overwhelming emotion of rejection. And I knew, my brain told me, no one there rejected me and nothing was personal. I completely recognized that. And yet the emotions were so intense. I had to finally stop and say, okay, am I having an emotional flashback? What am I feeling? I'm feeling rejected. Was it because of what happened then? No. Okay, what was it from? And it brought me back not to my relationship with the narcissist, but to my childhood and the feelings of being rejected by a narcissistic parent, and how overwhelming it was for that little girl inside of me to have to deal with. And I'm going to be honest, I cried. It took me by surprise. I cried so hard. And once I did, I recognized how painful that must have been to be a little girl and to feel that way. And it was an emotion I can't even explain. It wasn't just like tears. It was from so deep inside. The good thing is that after, I felt so much better. And that's the interesting thing about healing from emotional flashbacks. It does bring up pain. It does hurt. It does make you feel anxiety. But you always feel better when you learn how to acknowledge what's going on, how to validate the emotion that you're feeling, and when you remind yourself that that was then and this is who you are now. But you first have to allow yourself to feel that. That's where that validation comes in, and it kind of puts like a balm over the emotion of the child or the young woman or young person that you were when you went through those intense emotions. If you're still on your road to healing, take a moment to analyze how you react to current situations. Are there times when you feel confused by the emotion that's coming up in the circumstance that you're facing at the moment, or by the intensity of the emotion where it just doesn't seem to make sense? If so, recognize that the possibility or the probability that you are in an emotional flashback. Take a look at the steps on how to break out of them and how to begin healing them, and don't view them as a bad thing. It's not fun, but it's a part of recovery, and you cannot break out of C-PTSD and get back fully in touch with yourself until you heal those unresolved issues that are demanding your attention by means of emotional flashbacks. Here are the 13 steps to overcoming emotional flashbacks taken from the book Complex PTSD, A Guide and Map for Recovering from Childhood Trauma. The link for this publication will be in the description box below, and I highly recommend it. 1. Say to yourself, I'm having a flashback. Flashbacks take you into a timeless part of the psyche that feels helpless, hopeless, and surrounded by danger as you were in childhood. The feelings and sensations you're experiencing are past memories that cannot hurt you. 2. Remind yourself, I feel afraid, but I'm not in danger. You are safe in the present. 3. Own your right or your need to have boundaries. If someone is provoking these feelings, remind yourself you don't have to allow anyone to mistreat you, and you're always free to leave dangerous situations. 4. Speak reassuringly to your inner child. The child needs to know that you love him or her unconditionally, and that he or she can come to you for comfort and protection when feeling lost and scared. 5. Deconstruct eternity thinking. In childhood, fear and abandonment feels endless. A safer future was unimaginable. Remember, this flashback will pass as it always has before. 6. Remind yourself you're in an adult body with the resources to protect yourself. 7. Ease back into your body. Fear launches us into our head with worrying, numbing, and spacing out, but we can ask our body to relax. We can breathe deeply and slowly. We can slow down instead of rushing, which tends to make our flight response go off. We can find a safe place to just unwind. 8. Resist the inner critic's drasticizing and catastrophizing. Use thought stopping to halt the critic's endless exaggerations of danger. Refuse to shame, hate, or abandon yourself. Channel the anger of self-attack into saying no to your critic's unfair self-criticism. Use thought substitution and thought correction to replace negative thinking with a memorized list of your qualities and accomplishments. 9. Allow yourself to grieve. Flashbacks are opportunities to release old, unexpressed feelings of fear, hurt, and abandonment. 10. Cultivate safe relationships and seek support. Take time alone when you need it, but don't let shame isolate you. Feeling shame doesn't mean you're shameful. Educate your family and friends about flashbacks and ask them to help you talk and feel your way through them. 11. Learn to identify the types of triggers that lead to flashbacks. 12. Figure out what you're flashing back to. Flashbacks are opportunities to discover, validate, and heal your wounds from past abuse and abandonment. They'll also point to your still unmet developmental needs and can provide you with motivation to get them met. 13. Be patient with the slow recovery process. It takes time in the present to become de-adrenalized and considerable time in the future to gradually decrease the intensity, duration, and frequency of flashbacks. Real recovery is a gradually progressive process. It's often a 2 steps forward, 1 step back, not an attained salvation fantasy. Don't beat yourself up for having a flashback.